Hey, so I want to talk about Spider-Man Brand New Day. If you have not seen this movie and don't want to be spoiled, I would suggest moving along and not watching the rest of this. If you have seen it or if you don't care about being spoiled, then feel free to stick around. I hesitated about making this video because generally, like when I do content or create content, I focus on things that I really enjoy or that I love, and I don't generally try to spread negativity. And not that it's like a negative thing to criticize something, but like I just don't focus my content on that. So like if I do a reaction video or a review, I generally share about things that I really enjoy because I like to keep things positive. I never want to be that person who is raining on somebody else's parade or trying to ruin something that, somebody else really enjoyed. And with Spider-Man Brand New Day, I'm somewhat in the minority in that everybody really, really loved this movie. And I did like the movie, but I had problems with it that I think other people didn't have or viewed it in a different way than I did. So I don't want to, like, as I said, rain on their parade or take away from their experience or try to be negative or ruin their experience. So that's like, why I kind of hesitated to do this. At the same time, I saw the movie less than a week ago and I've been eager to talk about it. I shared a little bit about it on my threads on Instagram, and it seems like I am somewhat in the minority in some of my viewpoints, but I just feel strongly about it. And so I'm like, let me just sort of maybe try to express myself in a way that maybe is in a longer format and can kind of explain my point of view better than an Instagram or threads, really, where you're very limited in how much you can write at one single time. I was taken out of the movie, and the movie was somewhat ruined for me because of Sadie Sink's character. And Sadie Sink was amazing. Like in terms of her acting, I think, given how the part was written, I think she did a great job. So this is nothing to do with Sadie Sink. So to do with the writing and team and the direction that they chose to go. I am, as you can see, a big Jean Grey fan. Jean Grey is one of my favorite comic book characters of all time. I am a huge X-Men fan. I love the X-Men, and Jean Grey, again, one of my favorite characters. I have been anxiously awaiting the introduction of the X-Men into the MCU. I have not been a fan of any live action take on the X-Men. They all failed, in my view, to capture the X-Men appropriately and what the X-Men is all about. I have not liked any portrayal of Jean Grey in any live action version, and that unfortunately includes Brand New Day. I really struggled to enjoy this movie because, and it's, obviously I'm coming in with personal bias and a character that I'm really fond of, and I might be too wed to the source material, but it took me out of the movie because I'm watching this movie and the reveal comes that Sadie Sink is Jean Grey, which everybody was speculating about. And I'm like, but this is not Jean Grey. This is not the way that this character really should be characterized. And I shared this sort of like sentiment on my threads, and there were some people who understood what I was saying, but the majority, and I will say this is even like beyond just like my own posts, even like I'm reading other people's posts, the majority seem to really like or take to this take of Jean Grey, and they like the direction that it went. So that's why I say I don't want to like rain on anybody's parade. I'm glad people like it. Maybe this will get more people of Jean Grey. It's just kind of like stinks because I don't really feel like they understood the character or they didn't really care enough to understand the character, or they were willing to disregard core elements of the character in order to advance their sort of like plot goals and storyline goals for this particular movie. And I felt like with more nuanced and more thoughtful writing, there wouldn't have had to been that much change to the movie. It could have been done in such a way to still preserve the key characteristics of Jean Grey that I think were lost in the movie. And as I said, I think some people like were misunderstanding what I was trying to say. Some people got it, and then some people didn't get it. So for me, core elements of Jean Grey are that she is a person who struggles with the moral implications of her powers. She's a person that wants to do the right thing. She is driven by kindness, compassion. She has an abundance of empathy, but she also has this struggle with dark impulses and self-righteousness. And also, she's a character that's existed for a very long time, obviously for decades, and has been written by different people and written to fit certain storylines in different ways. I think, though, people conflate or think about her storyline, like in, for instance, the Phoenix or the Dark Phoenix saga, and think that this means Jean Grey has a dark side. I think one of the tragedies of like the Dark Phoenix saga is that she is a person that cares so much about doing the right thing, or what is the right thing in that moral struggle, and not pushing her powers too far, and like what are the boundaries of her powers, that when she falls prey to the Phoenix and we get the Dark Phoenix saga, she feels the guilt of what she did because she has so much compassion and empathy and that moral struggle. And that's one of like the tragedies of like what happens in that saga. So I struggled because it felt to me that the writers really wanted, and MCU and like Marvel wanted to create a fake out. And they didn't want to reveal that it was Jean Grey. Like they just hid it in all the promotional material for this movie. They didn't want to say it was Jean Grey. And it seemed to me that they wanted to do this reveal where it was really that Damage Control and Metzger were the bad guys. And that you find out in the course of the movie that, this person who thought who was the bad guy, Sadie Sink, Jean Grey, well, she's not really the bad guy. Metzger and Damage Control are. But in trying to set that up and trying to set up this fake out and like this plot twist, they wrote Jean Grey in such a way to make her not Jean Grey. Like her characterization was so off. And because again, like I think there is like a misunderstanding when I tried to communicate this. I don't mean it in like she couldn't have been mourning her sister and even pursuing extreme measures to try to find her sister. But she was written, almost her characterization was written either like, it reminded me very much of Madeline Pryor, which is not how Jean Grey acts, or like a generic villain almost. Like she was snarky, she was cold and callous. She didn't have any depth or nuance at all in terms of how she was acting. She was really just written like a sort of like cold and calculating villain, and a character that didn't feel any remorse, didn't feel any empathy or compassion for anyone, didn't feel any moral struggle, which is such an important part of who Jean Grey is, and instead was written so almost like over the top to be like villainous in order to do this fake out where it's like, actually, no, she's not the villain. Metzger and Damage Control is, and she was just looking for her sister. And I just think like there are so many like examples where it just was, I think, like poor writing of this character who has existed for so long. Because even when Jean Grey is like the Dark Phoenix or is like tapping into those darker impulses, she doesn't talk or act in the way that we see Jean Grey in this movie. And Jean Grey in this movie is portrayed again like this sort of generic, callous, snarky, cold villain. Grey, when she's the Dark Phoenix, is not the Goblin Queen. Like, it's just a different voice. Like, she has a different voice in terms of like how she holds herself, how she talks, and it's just not the way that we saw in this movie. And there are like number of examples, like, I mean, from the very beginning, you have a Jean Grey who has no qualms or no question and doesn't seem to ever have remorse of going into an older woman's body, taking over her body, driving a tank through New York City. Likely, I mean, I know it's not shown on screen, but just given the circumstances, likely harming, killing, putting people at risk of harm or being killed, blowing up or detonating the tank, again, risking people's lives. And she's doing it with such like almost glee. And I can kind of understand that directed towards damage control, even though it's, again, like, I don't know if that's like the right characterization for Jean. Like, even when she's like in a dark phase or like giving into those dark impulses, it's more like a righteousness and an indignation that she carries herself with. She doesn't really carry herself in the kind of way that they wrote Jean Grey in this movie, which again I felt like was more like a Madeline Pryor type characterization, which is like more sarcastic and callous and just didn't like work for me. Like, it just didn't feel like Jean. So you have her, like, as I said in the beginning, going in, and she's already not caring about innocent bystanders, very okay with entering into people's minds and sort of and crossing those boundaries and invading or intruding into people's minds, and has no sense of like the moral implication. And some of the commentary that I've read is like, well, this is before Jean Grey meets Charles Xavier. And yes, that's true. But I don't like that kind of reasoning for two reasons. First of all, in the comics, Jean Grey meets Charles Xavier at a younger age. She's 10 years old, and she meets him because she has her powers and she's feeling an overwhelming sense of empathy and compassion for a dying friend. And Charles Xavier comes and helps her because she's like losing herself and she doesn't have control of her powers. But she's 10 years old. And so 10 years old is much different than, I don't know how old Jean Grey is supposed to be in this movie. It might have been said and I might have missed it. I know Sadie Sink, I think she's like in her mid-20s. I get the impression that Jean Grey is supposed to be somewhere in her teens, like late teens maybe. But late teens is very different than 10. And so if like she's getting introduced to Charles Xavier as a young adult, like, you know, late teens into her early 20s, you know, she's already formed and developed as a person in a way that would be very different than a 10-year-old meeting Charles Xavier. And her meeting Charles Xavier is very important for her development and like putting her on her course. And Charles Xavier plays a very important mentorship and father-like figure or father-like role to Jean Grey. So kind of omitting that or like pushing it to later in her timeline, I'm not sure if that works. It could work, but I did feel the absence of Charles Xavier. I kept waiting for like, when is Charles Xavier going to show up? Because it's just, you see Jean and she's there and we're like, okay, X-Men, where's Charles Xavier? He's so integral to that. But maybe they're saving that reveal because we have Doomsday and we have Patrick Stewart's Charles Xavier is still in the mix. So maybe they don't want to, you know, get into who the new Charles Xavier may or may not be. Hopefully there's Charles Xavier because, again, he's so important to X-Men and all these characters. But also, like this idea that Jean developed her compassion or empathy only because of Charles's influence, I feel like takes away a lot of like Jean Grey's own agency and her own sort of core characteristics. Because again, like if you contrast it with her original storyline of she's a young girl and she has this deep empathy and compassion and overwhelmed by those feelings because her friend is dying. It's like a very different, like, sort of origin or starting point for this character. So I don't know if I like the idea of Charles Xavier playing a role in terms of helping her understand her powers, control her powers, helping her deal with and like be a sounding board about the moral struggle, about the boundaries, about like how far do I push this, what's ethical, what's right. I think that that's an important role for him, but I don't know if I love this idea of, well, she wouldn't find her moral footing without Charles Xavier, as if she was morally bankrupt until Charles Xavier showed up, and that she didn't have these core characteristics except for Charles Xavier. So anyway, I mean, so you have this whole sequence in the beginning. She is, you know, as I said, very like cavalier about using people, taking advantage and intruding on their minds, putting them at risk, even if they're not involved with damage control. She doesn't seem to have any qualms about it. As the movie continues, still trying to keep it as this big secret, make her seem like a villain so we can get this fake out later. And we obviously get to this whole sequence where she is taunting Peter and being very malicious and cold in her taunting and taking advantage of bystanders in New York City who are not related at all to damage control, not related to Peter Parker, invading their minds and putting them at risk. There's at least one older gentleman that ends up being hit by a taxi. I believe it was a taxi or a car. Some people speculate, well, no, he probably lived. I have no idea. To me, it looked like, you know, a pretty brutal hit. But regardless of whether or not he lived or not, I mean, she didn't seem to care, right? That's like my problem. I don't mind that she's pushing the limits of what is right or wrong, especially when she's faced with tremendous loss and this drive or need to obviously save her sister. I'm not opposed to the overarching concept, but like, why is she written in this way to be so like she doesn't even seem to care and she's just mocking and she's not even like righteous in the way she's talking. She's just trying to be cruel. And that doesn't like register again with who this character is supposed to be or who she has been for generally. You know, again, it depends on who's writing her and how, what comic run or whatever, but generally how she's been understood over the decades of existence. And we have this whole sequence where she ultimately ends up taking control of MJ's body and MJ's mind. And MJ, again, is an innocent bystander. Like, what has MJ done at all? Like, there is an argument to be made, well, Spider-Man, Peter, he is working with damage control. He's complicit in what they're doing. So maybe she has some sort of justification. But MJ hasn't done anything. Like, she's not even had any real interactions with Peter for 4 years. So like, she has nothing to do with this. And yet she takes over her body. She creates a scenario where MJ gets violated because she kisses Peter. She puts MJ at risk by making it so that she launches herself off a building. And where then Peter, you know, feels compelled to have to take her over to Frank's to keep her safe. And like, it just doesn't, again, like seem to match who Jean Grey is generally, like the core elements of her character. And it seemed unnecessary. It seemed like a plot contrivance. Like, it seemed like the writers wanted to create a scenario where Peter felt additional hurt and pain related to his relationship with MJ to further his character growth and his character arc. and to set it up so that MJ had to be with Peter, right? So that he had to take her to Frank's, keep her safe because she's at risk, because Jean Grey is going after her. So Peter's thinking, let me keep her safe. And so it seemed like that was why it was done. Again, like not having any thoughtfulness or nuance about like, well, what does this mean for Jean Grey as a character, and like what we know about her and how we're setting her up for the future. Because like essentially it creates this situation where you have this character who is written so cold and callous and like evil to further a plot, to further Spider-Man's character arc, to further his storyline with MJ, and to create like a fake out so Metzger is the real villain. Like once they revealed it's Jean Grey, everybody knows, well, she can't be the villain. She's Jean Grey. And so it's like everybody, you know, as the audience, right? You know, so it's like almost like was a silly fake out. So like why do it at all? Like I really don't understand it. And again, I'm an outlier because most people like seem to love this version of Jean Grey. They think like it makes sense. I just think that like with better or more nuanced writing, you could have kept this storyline without her being done in such a way. Like, why is she mocking Peter? Like, why is she being so cruel when she's like possessing MJ and like talking in the way she is? Like, what does this have to do with her sister? Like, again, like there's no even like that self-righteousness that Jean Grey is known for. It's just sort of like, again, like a Madeline Pryor, or like even like it feels like very like taking elements of other character storylines, like a Rogue or a Firestar, which I'll talk about, or even like an Emma Frost too. Like it just feels like that's not who Jean Grey is. So like either pick a different character if you want that type of interaction and that type of writing, or to give like the character that type of voice, or just like you could modify the writing to make Jean a deeper and more like introspective character with more self-reflection and more moral struggle and remorse, and still I think get a really good story and like still get the story beats that you need. Like the MJ and Peter stuff, maybe not, unless maybe you could have found a way to make it more rational or reasonable that Jean Grey would be involving MJ. But I just don't really understand, like, again, like this type of writing that they gave her, because it just was so false to, I think, like what this character is. Even again, like in her dark moments, like she doesn't act that way. Like she's not Madeline Pryor. And then obviously we get to reveal that what she's really looking for is her sister, and he realizes, oh, Metzger's bad, and like it's not even a surprise for the audience. So again, like it feels like a waste to have, you know, botched this famous character who has existed for such a long time in comic books, and to just be like, we're going to do something like so radically different with who she is. It seems so unnecessary because it was like not even like a big, like a twist that was like shocking. So her sister, and this is again like where I think people misunderstood what I was trying to say, or like my point of view, or like when I'm reading other people's comments. She does have a sister in the comics. Her sister was not a mutant. There were plans that you can read that there was intentions to maybe make her sister a mutant, and it didn't come to fruition. I don't think there's anything wrong with making her sister a mutant. I don't think there's anything wrong, again, with like the storyline of her her sister being taken by the damage control and her needing to get and find her sister. I didn't really love the flashback scene with her and her sister. That also was like a very odd take, because like again they were just sort of sitting on this park bench and they're very cavalier, let's just take control of some innocent woman's mind. And I understand, again, it's like before she gets introduced to Charles Xavier, but like why is it that she needs Charles Xavier to have like a moral compass or to think about these issues? Like, yes, I understand that they're young people and they're teenagers, but like, I don't know. I like give some young people a little bit more credit. I just wish, like, again, like there's just been like some reflection, even if they did something like that, like, I don't know, like care a little bit or think about it a little bit, or like question it a little bit. But in any event, I mean, for me, when you find out it's her sister, she finds out her sister is killed. I think that's the moment that makes sense. When you find out, she finds out her sister's killed, that she gives into the dark impulses. And it could have had a much better impact, because you could have had, and if the movie portrayed her with more thought and more nuance of struggling with her powers, and like how far she should push her powers, and with the issue of like, I need to save my sister and I'll do anything I need to save my sister, but I also have this moral struggle and I don't want to hurt people that are innocent or not involved in this, and like self-righteous and indignant, but not like this weird like just taking pleasure in like being cruel, like is not the same thing as being like, I'll do what I need to save my sister, but I also feel guilty if like there are innocent people who like get caught in the crossfire. But I think like you like seeing that she was struggling with the moral, like, how far do I push it, and like trying to maybe restrain herself. I just need to find my sister. I just need to find my sister, and then everything will be okay. And I'm not trying to give into those darker impulses. But then she finds out her sister is killed, and then the darker impulses come out, and it will be obviously directed at damage control. And then you have the sequence with Peter and Aunt May, and him bringing her down. And I think that that would have worked a lot better for introducing this character to maybe a new audience, of being more true to who the character is. And I just wish that they had maybe went more in that direction. If she wasn't shown as such like a nasty character, and I know, again, the thing that I keep hearing is, well, her sister was captured, and like what do you expect? What do you expect? Like, and Peter was part of it, and like, and I get it. I'm not saying that wouldn't drive somebody, and I'm very close to my sisters, that wouldn't drive someone to take steps and actions that would maybe not be characteristic of how they usually are. And so maybe it wouldn't be characteristic of who they usually are. But at the same time, to revel in being cruel and like seemingly take, pleasure in it, like, which was somewhat like the sequence with MJ and Spider-Man. Like that's how it read to me. And to not have any reflection about it or remorse is just like an odd choice. And also, like, this is a movie, and like you're establishing this character for the first time, so like I don't know why you would establish her this way. And again, maybe I'm wrong, because people seem to like get her and like her, so I guess I'm wrong. I don't know. It just like felt like it just was a misunderstanding of this character, and like they're calling her Jean Grey. It was reminding me of like even when I watched the original X-Men movies, the original like live action X-Men movies, and we had Anna Paquin's Rogue, and like no like shade to Anna Paquin. I think she was fine in the movie, but just didn't feel like Rogue, right? Like traditionally, like how we would envision Rogue. And again, the same thing was like the excuse or the explanation was, well, this is Rogue at the beginning of her journey, and she'll get to wherever she's gonna get. But in those movies, I felt like Rogue never got to where she was supposed to get, first of all, like in the course of those movies. And like it still didn't feel like the character. And it's like, well, this is an iconic character who's existed in comics for a long time, and like why go in this direction with introducing this character in a way that's so foreign from what people love about this character, and like why this character is iconic. And I wonder, like, would they do it with certain other characters, although X-Men's like been weird, like as I said, I haven't liked any live action portrayal. I will, like, this is like a hot take, I don't even like the portrayal of how, and I love Hugh Jackman, I don't even like Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, because I don't think that it's like true to the way Wolverine is is supposed to be in the comics. I think Hugh Jackman is too charismatic and too likable. And I love Wolverine so much. And I just think he's too likable, Hugh Jackman. And you know, obviously like Cyclops has was not right and disappointing, and like Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique, like I don't know. I just would like X-Men to be portrayed the way, um, in a different way. It's like a little bit more true to what, you know, why these people have fallen in love with these characters. Anyway, so yeah, Jean Grey really took me out of this movie. It just kind of ruined it for me because I love her so much and I've been so excited for X-Men to be part of the MCU and for Jean Grey to join the MCU, and it just wasn't right. I'm keeping an open mind, right? You know, we get to the end of the movie and we see Sadie Sink on a bus. I should say Jean Grey, I'm sorry. On a bus seemingly upstate. I was hoping like for a Charles Xavier because I felt like that would have maybe brought some sort of like resolution. But she just didn't really again seem to have like any remorse or I don't know. Like I just was hoping for some sort of anything, you know, beyond like what we saw. I just didn't feel, it felt very surface level, and it's such a shame for like such a great character. And like the other thing, like people, I feel like there's like a misunderstanding of Jean because some people think Jean Grey is boring, which everybody's allowed to their opinion. But I think people think Jean Grey is boring or she's soft or she's weak, and they don't really recognize the strength she has. I mean, they recognize her strength when she's obviously like, you know, got the Phoenix Force or she's Omega and she's like really tapping into all her powers. But I mean, I'm talking about like her strength as a character. I think people view her as a weak character. I think she's actually a very strong character, because she really does deal with these moral struggles and what's right and what's wrong and being in the gray, like this gray zone, which is always X-Men, and like how far do I push it, and you know, when do the, you know, ends justify the means? Are there some means that can never be justified by the ends? What's appropriate for me to do, what's not appropriate for me to do, that self-righteous struggle that she sometimes falls into, or like that aspect of herself where she can get very sort of indignant, because I think that's also part of her moral struggle, right? Of like she can start to see the world in maybe like black and white, in some occasions, and then if she feels like she's right about something or morally correct about something, she can like end up being very self-righteous. You know, she is though a person that really is compassionate and empathetic, and she's very thoughtful about other people's feelings, and we just didn't see any of that like in the movie, like even a hint of it, right? Like even a hint of it. And like, are we just gonna say this is all from Charles Xavier? Like does she have no, like nothing from herself, it's all Charles? Like I don't think that's right or fair. Like I think she's fundamental part of who she is, and like I think in some parts like part of her powers, right? Because she is a telepath, and so she gets into people's minds and she starts to understand people in a way, so she really is sitting in the shoes of other people. I just, you know, I'm hopeful maybe in the future movies we can see her evolve from what we saw in this movie, which I felt was like a little like, I don't know, lacking any sort of like real depth. Would have liked her to have a little bit more depth or anything. Like I wish she wasn't used to serve like, it very much felt like she was a plot device to me in this movie, of like again setting up the whole thing with Peter and MJ, and setting up, you know, the whole fake out what Metzger and is really the bad guy, and that damage control. The only other thing I'll also say is that the other alternative to this storyline of using Jean Grey, and as I said, I think it could have worked. It was just a little bit of some rewriting in terms of her characterization and more thought put into her Jean Grey's characterization. But one of the other rumors was that Sadie Sink was going to be Firestar, and I actually wonder how like that might have worked, because you could have then had Emma Frost there, so to the extent you want like that body jumping sort of thing, and like that scene with MJ and stuff, you could have had Emma Frost involved, could have had Firestar, who is, you know, struggled with her powers. How do I control my powers? Couldn't control her powers. And, you know, that's very parallel to like Peter's struggle in the movie, and could have tied in thematically with that. She obviously has a history with Peter Parker. I mean, some of the criticism so it was like, what was Jean Grey's connection to Peter Parker? I mean, the X-Men and Spider-Man have always been tied together in like comic books, like bring characters together all the time. So I'm not necessarily like against like putting maybe like a more random pairing together. But Firestar does have like obviously a history, starting with the animated show that they were on together, and that was like her origin, Angelica Jones. And obviously she has since developed in the comics, and in the comics, you know, she struggles with her powers. She ends up with Emma Frost. Emma Frost is evil at that juncture, and she's gone through like different things. Could have had your plot twist, like Emma Frost actually a bad guy, and whatever, like, you know, that villain fake out thing, and it could have worked too. So I wonder like if they had went in that direction, you know, what that could have looked like or been like. I also will say I didn't really love the portrayal of Jean's powers, in that like this very almost over the top jumping from person to person, but you have to be within a certain range, and again like very theatrical almost, and overdone in terms of trying to, I guess, show her powers in a different way, but didn't really, I don't know, there's just the way Jean's telepathic powers have worked, I just think could have been done maybe more interestingly, than just like, let's jump from one person to the other and make a snarky comment and be so like, I don't know, obvious with it. I don't know. I don't like, I'm like, how is this gonna work, you know, moving forward with showing her powers? I also wonder like if they overpowered her a little too much by the end. She's obviously an extremely powerful mutant, one of the most powerful characters in Marvel, and I just don't know if they got there too soon, like especially in a Spider-Man movie, and like where do we go from here? And similarly, like we've now seen like an evil Jean Grey or like a dark Jean Grey, and so like if they're gonna introduce Dark Phoenix, where does that, you know, how do we make that different or feel fresh or new, as opposed to like, oh well, yeah, like this character, this is what this character has shown us before already, you know, and we lose that sort of contrast between a very good moral Jean Grey, or a person who thinks about others and has feelings about others and compassion for others, to, you know, somebody who doesn't. In this now version, the MCU version, it's like, well, oh yeah, she'll do what she needs to do. She's got a dark streak, clearly, like, it's so that like that contrast is missing. So kind of takes some of that away should they decide to do Phoenix stuff. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I think I'm alone, but if you agree, let me know. It would be nice, maybe not to stand alone. If you don't agree, I'm not trying to ruin anything for anybody. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Feel free to share your comments. I'm always happy to have conversation with people, as long as everybody's nice and respectful and kind. I don't think there's anything wrong with having an intellectual conversation and discussing characterizations and storylines and ways things that could have been done or should have been done, or why you like the way something was done and why you think it worked. Go at it. I don't think I'm going to convince anybody, so I'm not trying to do that either. I'm just trying to share. I was a big Jean Grey fan. Why I was a little sad after I saw Brand New Day, and why it just took me out of the movie. And so while I did enjoy parts of the movie, and like I liked a lot of it. It was hard for me to like really enjoy it because I was like, oh, but why are you doing that to my girl? Why are you writing Jean Grey this way? Like, either rewrite her characterization or just make it like Firestar and Emma Frost or something else. Or just something else. Anyway, that's it. That's my take. So we'll see what's in store. I'm excited for Doomsday, and I am excited for X-Men and the Mutants in the MCU. So hopefully future installments will sit better with